So our speakers today are Pradeep is going to be presenting, and then we also have Lagesh and Mason with us. They're going to be helping with chat and responding to any questions. And then later this week we'll have Deepak and Will. So I think you've met Lagesh. Pradeep, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, sure. Hi, good morning, good evening, for all the folks joining from across the world. So I'm really excited to be here. Myself, Pradeep Shukla. I work as for Peraton, a national security company here in the US. I'm based in Austin, Texas, and I'm really looking forward to this session.
Great. Thank you so much. All right. I'm just gonna go next. So again, I mentioned that we're doing Orchestrator today. The thing I wanted to point out though, and I've mentioned this a few times, but if you guys are following us and you're doing your self-paced content, don't forget that if you have any questions, just to please reach out to us on the forum. We'll work with you. So it's important this week that I just let you know that you need to complete all of your self-paced learning and get the UiPath authorized credential. If you get that and reach out to me, what I can do is see if you guys are interested in getting certified about getting a voucher. But unless you have that authorized credential, I'm not going to do that because it just means that you haven't finished everything and that you don't want the certification voucher to expire. So, the other thing about this particular course is after we finish on Wednesday, you still have a month to finish these other assignments. So, I've listed them here. You'll see them as part of the learning path anyway, but it's relatively about another 4 or 5 hours of training that you need to go through. So I'll be repeating this on Wednesday, but I just want you guys to know that you have another month to finish all your self-paced training, and then you still have an opportunity to reach out to me. So with that, I'm going to make sure that I tape the recording, get all that stuff ready for you guys. You can have access to that tomorrow, and then we'll be putting the link to the last session in the chat for you, and then also all the important links again. So I'm going to just go ahead now and stop sharing and turn it over to Pradeep.
All right, thanks, Diana.
Hmm.
The- One moment, I'm just finding where's the share. All right, can you guys see my screen? I-
Yes, not yet.
Not yet. All right, one more time. All right, this is
Now I can see it.
all right. All right. Hello and welcome everyone. And thanks, Diana. Thanks everyone for
Hmm.
putting this together. So I'm really excited for today's session. I'm sure you have gone through all these sessions. It's been 3 weeks, 3 full weeks of training. This is the fourth week. As Diana mentioned, these are some of the last few sessions, session 7, and then you have the session 8. Um, so I'm sure you're following along and not just these sessions through the community, but also through the UiPath Academy, the training program itself on from the academy. So what I'm going to do today, let me move this from here. Okay, so today's session is about working with Orchestrator. So Orchestrator is, as of now, you have done a lot of use cases up until now. You did some work on PDF, you worked on Excel. Most of those automations have been on your UiPath Studio itself. Now, as a developer, when you're starting, I'm sure everyone is using UiPath Studio desktop client. That's how we want you to start. Some of you may have started working with Studio Web. That's perfectly fine. But today's session will focus on uh, integration between UiPath Studio and Orchestrator. So what is Orchestrator? So I'll go a little bit in terms of why the need of Orchestrator is, what's the main capabilities of Orchestrator, what are the primary features, like the go-to features that you should know. And obviously, it's a platform that's evolving, ever evolving. There are a lot of things that have been added as we have seen the progression from several years on the UiPath Orchestrator platform. So I'll cover the core functionality and then I'll go in some of the demos with some of these key concepts that you should definitely understand so you can really take advantage of it and harness the benefits of Orchestrator. So the first and foremost is Orchestrator itself, right? Why there is a need for an orchestrator. Now, we all have built automations on UiPath Studio, and these automations, as we call them, attended automation that can run on your own machine. On your own laptop, it can be a small program that you want to keep your calendar tidy up, or you want to just build a small presentation, or you want to run some automation in terms of creating your Excel file, performing some calculations, that kind of stuff, right? But when it comes, when you graduate from that level of automation, right, then you want to build something that can work at a company, at an organization, at an enterprise level, right, where you may or may not be really monitoring your automation each and every step of it. So that's where the concept of orchestrator came in. Like, okay, now I need to have a controller that can run my automation autonomously or at least based on certain trigger. And that trigger could be anything, right? It could be a time-based trigger, it could be a certain event or certain process. If you want to build an automation that reads your Outlook email and responds to some of the standard emails that you get, you can build some rules around it and so on and so forth, right? So that's where the purpose of Orchestrator is. Now, how Orchestrator works, that's when we log in into our studio account now, our account is already connected. When we are logging in, it is connected to the orchestrator behind the scene because that is how you are inheriting your licenses for studio, right? Now, for a project to work on Orchestrator, this diagram kind of shows how the sequence goes in, right? So you create a project. Right now, we are here up until what we have built, most of the cases. So developers create an automation project that stays in Studio. Now you can run it directly in a debug mode, run mode from there. But when you are ready to move to the next stage, you go through a publish process where you publish your package, publish your automation, and once you publish your automation, that is what is termed as a package because now it's ready, right? Um, the second stage at orchestrator level, what happens that a package by itself is not of much use because at orchestrator what we are looking at an enterprise deployment of automation. So it's very important that we have defined roles, we have defined security, we have defined guardrails around our automation. So that's where another concept comes in of folders. That fold, so you define a package and you match that package to a certain folder. For example, right? So when you're creating your automation, in your particular tenant, you may have different departments, right? Or even at a granular level, if you want to look at it, like from a software development lifecycle perspective, you start as a you create an automation as a developer, and then you move to the next stage of testing or to the next stage for UAT, and then you go to go live. So all those kind of stages can be represented through folders. Either you define that as part of the SDLC, because at an organizational level, we'll come to that concept, how we break it up at an organizational level. Like within an organization, if you have different departments, HR, finance, um, IT, and all so and so forth, right? So once a package and folder comes together, then it becomes a process. And that process then can be assigned to an unattended robot. Um, if this is an associate course, so we'll not go too much into unattended mode, but just for your understanding, unattended mode where you can run your automation background in the background with some trigger and all that, all mechanisms, right? Event mechanism or time-based trigger mechanism. But unattended robot is connected to your orchestrator through a heartbeat, and through that it keeps stays in sync with orchestrator, not just in terms of staying in from the connectivity perspective, but licensing and other services that are available to your robot. So I hope that makes sense in terms of why there is a need for orchestrator and what is the purpose of orchestrator. So in simple terms, it's a web application that in a way controls, monitors your automations, right? Uh, Rather than someone doing themselves day in, day out. All right, let's move on to the next. And I'll come to the demo also, and then we'll touch upon some of these things when we are going through. So what are the main capabilities? So now that we know why there is an orchestrator in this platform, let's talk about some of the capabilities. So provisioning is one. Provisioning, when we are talking about provisioning, you can consider provisioning of robots, assigning machines, provisioning of now with all the agentic AI. Again, I don't want to spin off to that conversation, but you can provision your agents and all that as well. Control and license distribution. Again, this is a web application. This is not just for developer perspective, but also from an administration perspective. So think about your IT team who administers your platform itself, right? So from their perspective, UiPath Orchestrator also provides an interface for them to make sure that they have provisioned sufficient licenses, sufficient uh, AI units and other features in terms of they can also define the users, their security privileges, roles, and all that kind of good stuff, right? That's what makes the enterprise run. Obviously, one of the important role that orchestrator has, is to run automation jobs in unattended mode. It also provides storage and distribution. We'll talk briefly about that. One of the key concepts from Orchestrator about storage. Um, Monitoring. So that's one of the interesting features that Orchestrator is kind of has a built-in monitoring. You don't have to buy another tool or integrate with something else like Kibana or anything, right? So it provides you in terms of how many automations were executed, successful, failure, and all that metric that you have based on different time range, 7 days, month, 6 months, that kind of provision you have. That way you have, as a developer or even as a team lead, you may be able to look at different automations that are running and where they are. And interconnectivity is primarily where it provides you options to connect with other softwares. So think about if you're creating an automation, again, this is just from an idea perspective. If you're creating automation that has to integrate with Jira in terms of pulling story items or going and updating story items, think about integration with ServiceNow, even some of the more regular integrations like integration with OneDrive, Microsoft OneDrive, or Office 365, SharePoint. So there are so many of connectors are out there. I think I lost count of it, but last I knew it had like 1,500 connectors, but I'm sure out of the box connector numbers have grown a lot over the years. So you can find that. I'll go over that briefly just to show you where you can find that. All right. So now let's come to another interesting concept, or the main purpose of how briefly I talked about, right? How you define this uh, a space, an individual space for your work in the orchestrator. So there are two concepts, a tenant and a folder. A tenant is a highest level organizational level concept. Means if you are, let's say, ABC Corp, and you buy UiPath platform, you want all your departments to have access to the platform. You want their automations to be running, but you don't want all the automations because of, again, security and obviously in terms of organization itself, right? To keep it organized. You don't want your IT automation projects mixed with HR projects or finance teams automations, right? So you want to keep them separate. So that's where tenant level separation comes up, where you can define tenants within Orchestrator. You can have multiple tenants, as many. I think there is no as such a limit to it, but if you have an enterprise license, you can create multiple tenants for each department. So that provides you data segregation, configurations. That way you're not mixing things together and you're not creating a chaos, right? You want to keep things organized. Whereas folders are one layer down under a tenant. So folder is more in terms of if you want to separate things out, what I was talking about earlier, right? If you can want to build something, dev test separation, or even further breakdown in terms of automation. Like if you have certain automations that you don't want other team members to have access to, because they may have some data that's not authorized to be shared. So that kind of scope restriction you can define the privilege, you can define the permissions, and have those folders provide you that feature. In terms of access control, I think briefly I touched upon it. Each tenant is completely isolated from each other. There is no way to share data across them. So they all have access. A user that is defined for a particular tenant, they will have access to their tenants only. Uh, Similarly, for folders, access control is defined in terms of which machine, which robots have access to a certain folder. They go much granular in terms of how you use them and how you want to provision them. In terms of specifics, if you want to look at it, tenants provide you isolation in terms of robots. So let's say one robot is configured for tenant A. So that robot will not be available for tenant B to use it, even though it's sitting idle, right? So that's just one example. Users, you have to define the users across in a particular tenant. If one user is going to be using both the tenants, then you have to create them on both sides. So similarly for folder, primarily folder level access we define by assets. We'll talk about storage buckets today, queues, and triggers also. We'll take a look at it. All right, so this I think I briefly touched upon already. How do you organize things in your organization for your orchestrator? So at a company level, you have different departments. You can define these different departments as separate tenants, and within those separate tenants, you can have separate folders. And again, the orchestrator does not govern that organization level structure. That is something that you would define with your IT team, what makes sense for your organization, right? So orchestrator provides you these features, so you can take advantage of it, but it's completely up to you how you want to build it out. All right, next. So now we are going to go into some specifics in terms of what we are going to look at today. So assets, when we talk about assets, the one of the examples that we'll look into today, that what is the purpose of an asset? So primarily what we use, an asset can be of different types. It can be, you can create a text type of asset. It can be a Boolean, it can be an integer, and it can be a credential. So I'm sure text, Boolean, and integer make sense right out of the gate. Text is something if you want to create, let's say your automation is going to access a certain website. So rather than keeping that website name in your automation itself, you can create a text-based asset and just you can leverage that. The benefit of that is in case that or that URL changes, you don't have to recompile your automation, right? You can just go to your orchestrator and you can update in the asset itself. Similarly for Boolean, if there is a certain case where you want, so think about this as a like a global variable, right? If you're coming from a programming background, this is or a configuration file, even better, yeah, better than global variable. It's more like a configuration. Integer is also another case if you, let's say, if your automation is using a certain IP and certain port number, I would suggest you can move it into an asset. In case if that port number changes at some point of time, then you don't have to update your automation. You can just go ahead and update the asset. Last but not least, credential. But this is a very important one. Credential is something, let's say you have a website, you want to log in and you want to test your automation. Credential is the login credential for that automation. So rather than keeping that username password combination inbuilt in your into your automation, you create an asset and you put that uh, login information in there. So that way you're not mixing things up, and when you need it, you can always go change. Like some of the organizations at enterprise level, most of them that I know of, they change their login password every 90 days. Some some have a lot more aggressive timelines, but given in those cases, like one of the automations that I built some time back, they have a policy every 90 days the password expires. So you have to come and rather than keeping it as part of automation, you keep it as part of credential. So every 90 days, just 2 days back before on 85th day or 88th day, you go and update the password, right? That way it's completely hands off. It's a change at one place and you're good to go. Next is libraries. So libraries are also kind of, you can think of libraries as small utility functions. And once you have defined them, that are reusable components. So once you define and create them, you can leverage those libraries from there. And again, that's from a custom library perspective. There may be a case where you want to use an existing library, so you can use from NuGet packages, and you can reference them in your automation as well. All right, next is queues. Queues is one of the most interesting concepts and it's a very powerful concept, and we'll go into much deeper on that particular topic. And I would like all of you to pay attention if you have and ask questions if you have any, right, while we are going through that. So queues are, think of queues in a way, these are transactional items, a transactional block that helps you keep track of the activities that an automation is performing, and at the same time keep those keep those processes isolated from each other, so it doesn't impact what happens with one iteration does not impact the next one. Last but not the least, here is a storage bucket. That's another concept. This is primarily used for storing files. But I'll say this, it does not mean that storage bucket is your document management system, right? So don't consider that you can put everything, all your documents and all other information in the storage bucket. It has its usage, but overuse of storage bucket is also not the right way to design an automation. So we'll talk about that a little bit more. All right. So from a business standpoint, these are the two most important concepts. I briefly already touched them in terms of queues and storage buckets. So we'll look at some a little bit more in detail how queues work in the orchestrator itself. All right, so there is then best practices to follow, but I'll come back to this one later. Let me jump on to the demo side, but before I switch, is there any thing, Logesh or Mason, do you see any other questions that you want me to
No, I think we're
respond
good.
to?
Yeah, there are some questions in the chat, but I'm responding as we
Okay,
go. We should be good.
all right, perfect. Thank you. Thank you very much. All right, so let's first look at the orchestrator. All right, so this is my homepage or a landing page. When I go to my UiPath automation orchestrator portal, when I log in, based on your user profile, you'll see a greeting over here, and then based on that, you can define in terms of your scheme whether you want a dark theme or a light theme. So that's pretty standard interface that's available to all of us. Besides being a one central location for all information on UiPath, you can download, you have a download center, you can download things from here. But let's get to the orchestrator itself. There are a lot of things here. I don't want to get diverted from our today's topic. So this is my tenant, and I have named it as a default tenant. You can have any other name. So we talked about briefly, right? And our organization can create as many tenants as they want to. So that's what I was referring to. So you can come here with your IT team. And the important thing here is, as a developer, when you are logging in, if you're using your community UiPath, then you'll have access to all features. But let's say you are in an organization when you're working, right? You may not have access to all the features of it. And there is a reason, because that's again driven by your user profile, right? If you have been given a profile, assigned to a profile of a developer, you may not have access to the administration tab or administration option. So let's take a look at it briefly over there before we jump into the code. So when you go here and you open this panel, so that will show you your home page, which we just saw, Orchestrator, Studio, and few other features. There is a very nifty feature of making favorite. So which services you want to make favorite, you can do that. And this is what I was talking about, the admin profile. So when you go here, this gives you a full control of your Orchestrator platform. And you can see this is an organizational level view. And then when I go to the tenant, it changes a little bit. Some of the things remain the same, but other things change. So at a default level or at a tenant level, these are the permissions or these are the services that you have, right? So as an admin, when I'm here, you can see here licenses, enterprise plan, where you have, so at an organizational level, you may have multiple licenses, developer licenses, unattended robot, and all that. So that's your IT team will define how many licenses are available to your tenant. Okay. And whichever tenant you're assigned to, those services will be available to you. And then obviously you can configure them as you need to. Account and local groups, as the name suggests, right? This is where you create your account, user account. You can define your robot account, and you can also create groups. And these groups just a way to organize. If you have 5 developers, you can put them as a automation developer, or if you have citizen developers, you have administrators, which will be primarily your IT team. So these are some of the standard groups. These are built-in groups that are available right away. But you can create your own local group as your IT team needs it. So going back to my previous comment about how you organize your um, orchestrator platform, right? So you have an option here where you can go and create as many tenants you want to. For an enterprise plan, you will be given that access to create it. And every tenant looks identical as a default setting. Again, your IT team or IT admin has provision or has options so they can customize what features are available in a certain tenant. So it's a pretty powerful platform, not just for a developer, but also from IT team to manage their work. All right, let's come back to the orchestrator here. So when we come to Orchestrator, after tenant, let's briefly talk about the folders. So this is once you are in a tenant, this is your tenant view. Let me click on this tenant. You see these options are here. And these options, well, there are a lot of things over here. Under monitoring itself, you can see this is an overview, and then you have agents, machine, processes, queues. So you can monitor all these layers. And similarly, as you navigate through each of these options, it will show you uh, different services available. Under folder, if you go, you have shared and UI demo. So shared folder is a standard shared folder. So let me briefly touch upon this also. So my workspace is your private workspace where you are working, and any automation or any code that you build here does not spill over to any other folder. So it's always isolated and your private space. You can build, break things, test things, discard things. You're completely at your liberty, right? Then you have a shared folder, which comes as a by default shared location on the orchestrator. What does that mean? It means anyone in your development team, if they are also have the same user profile, in terms of what we looked at it, right? If they are in the same user group, if you publish any automation under shared, that will be available to them also. So they can also take a look at it, review it, or provide feedback. So think about that's another collaboration stage where you can use that with your team members. And as before, you can create as many folders as you need here, and you can define their permission. So on shared, when I come here, right, I look at, this is a standard dashboard, but let's say if I want to look at in terms of um, what automations I have deployed in the shared location, I can see all the automations that I have. Um, and other information in terms of looking at under automation, you have, these are just different stages for a process. We talked about process, if you remember. When you publish your automation and you configure it to a folder, it is considered as a process, right? So that's why they are, and there's a process header, and these automations are here. Then you have a job. When you actually schedule a particular process, then it becomes a job, which is going to run at a particular trigger, right? If you define a trigger, time-based trigger, event-based trigger, it will kick off at that moment. Uh, Apps is not in scope for today's discussion. This is about UiPath apps. And then obviously you have triggers, and you have a logging for each and every automation that you run. You can check the log from here. So I have two folders here, so you can see different automations that are here. In terms of which automation I have, that's where you define where you want to publish your automation, and they will be visible in that particular section. Now let's talk about queues, because that's the important concept I want to go over today. And we'll start with a simple example, and then we can go into a little bit more in-depth example. So this is a very simple automation that I have, which actually reads a particular file, the read range. It's reading a workbook. It picks up data from that particular sheet. It creates a data table, and then what it does, add queue item. So it creates queue item. So now let me show you what queue item looks like. So this will give you a better view of it. All right. So let's say this is my queue. So how do you create a queue? So let me first show you, and then I'll walk you through in terms of creation also. So queue is a placeholder where you create individual uh, isolated items that you want to execute. So think of a very simple example, uh, rows in an Excel sheet. So let's say you're given a customer list, right, in a spreadsheet, and you have hundreds of customers in it. What you need to do, you need to read through each item, and let's say It's one of the simple classic examples that uh, is out there. You want to check their eligibility for a loan, okay? Based on the information that you have, that is your name, date of birth, not date of birth, but let's say name, income, and all that information, right? Based on which I'm going to evaluate. So having a queue-based system is going to help us perform each iteration in isolation. And why that is important? Because I don't want my, let's say in one of the data elements, you have a missing information, and you don't want the whole automation itself to fail or get to a standstill state because it cannot proceed to the next. So that's where queues become a very important concept. In standard programming, you may have heard about this term OLTP, right? Transactional processing system. So what does that do? That it processes each iteration as a transaction. What that means, if it completes, it will complete end to end. But if there is an issue and it cannot complete, it can roll back, or it can just mark that particular element or process as failed and move on to the next data element. So it's not stopping. The process is not stopping for that whole thing to complete just because one item got is failed or it has a missing data or some other issues. So it will just skip that line item and move on to the next one. So I'll pick a example and then let me walk you through with that. So we'll take a very simple example. Um, yeah, so let's say this is a very simple example. So this is my Excel sheet. It has three things: name, age, and city. It's a very basic automation, but what I'm trying to show here, the purpose of queues and how you run through this. So I have only 5 items here, 5 customer information. And what I'm going to do with this simple automation, what it does, it actually it reads that Excel sheet, picks each item, adds them into a queue, and then it picks each row and presents that information. And just to keep it simple, I'm just presenting it as a message. Which automation is this? No, not this one. We'll come back to dispatcher later. Yes. So here, so first of all, when you come here, and again, some of you are still learning through this process. So I'll go in detail step by step, so it's easy to understand. So I'm sure you're familiar with this panel. We have created a sequence. We are using a rearrange workbook activity that reads a data file that I just showed you for the data. Once that data is read, what it does, it takes this data into a data table as into this data table, and then we are reading through the data table one row at a time, and that item we are adding in a queue. And where is that queue? Queue. So you see here the queue name, test queue. And where is this coming from? This is coming from here. So this is a test queue. And just so that we do it and you have a view of it, I'm going to delete this, which I already have it here. So I'm going to delete this and then I'll create it again. All right, so the test queue is gone. Create. So when we come here for queue creation, it's pretty straightforward. There are a lot of options here, but to start with, or as a beginner, right, you don't have a lot of things to look at or make updates to it. Some of this stuff is advanced. but I'll briefly touch upon it. So the basic thing, the mandatory thing, as you can see, right, the name of the queue is the only mandatory thing here. Everything else has a default value. So now auto retry for failed items, we do have an option for auto retry. So and that's another feature, right? We don't have to write this whole thing. It's already available as part of queue. If a queue fails and its status is not updated as completed, whenever the next automation runs that is reading through that queue, it will pick up that queue again and try to process it. You can define how many times you want to retry it. So you can define that. There are a few other things here, like in terms of schema definitions. So if you want to define your own, excuse me, JSON schema, you can do that. You can define a SLA for queue. And why do we want to do that? So think about that for a business, right? If we are running this day in, day out, I don't want a queue item, if it fails, to live there forever, right? So I want to define an SLA, 5 days, 2 days, 1 day, or 6 hours, whichever may be that's relevant to your organization, right? You can define that, and that will, after that time, that queue item will get removed from the processing. Now, the same way as you have an SLA, you have a retention policy also. How long you want your queues to be there? So if you have a queue item that's there for 30 days, even if it is complete, you still don't want to accumulate them forever, right? You can define after how many days you can mark them delete, and whether it is for completed queue items. As you can see, this is for completed items and this is for incomplete items. So you can define that configuration here. Now let's move on. So we added a name of the queue. I'll just leave everything as is, default option, and that's it. So I have now a queue. The most important thing is the name should be an exact match what you're using in your automation. So in my automation, what I'm using test underscore queue. So this is kind of the case sensitive one, right? So you have to use the same way, exactly match that. And you can verify that once you have created that queue in your orchestrator, if you come here and you can see this will pull the queue item here. And you may ask, how does it know where to pull that queue from? That's where when I open this automation, I define a couple of things, right? It's obviously my studio is connected to Orchestrator already. The only thing that is left is which folder, right? So I pick up this folder. I'm defining everything under UI demo folder. So I have to change my folder location if this is something else. And based on that folder location, I'm getting the queue names here. If I go back, you can see this test queue is created under this folder. So that's a folder level organization where you're defining the objects. They will be only available in that folder. So in my shared folder, I don't have any queues defined, right? So if I go back on my studio here and I switch that from UI demo to shared, let's say, and I want to check for queues, well, it's showing it here. That's interesting. It's shared maybe. Then did I share it? Hmm, hmm. All right. Queues are defined. Okay, I don't think so. I have defined the permission for it. So it's the same level permission for both shared and UI demo. That's why these queues are available over there too. All right.
Mm,
So
Excuse me.
that explains it.
You
Yes.
you have to look at the add queue item activity. In that, you select the UI demo. That's why.
Yeah, that's right. So it's good catch. All right, so yeah, so that's right. If I change my folder here, then it's not available anymore. There you go. So that explains it. Thank you for pointing that out. All right, so now you have the queues here, defined and connected. From here, once I have my queues defined, this particular activity will add each of those items from the spreadsheet into the queue. Once I have that, then I have the next stage here. What I'm doing here, I'm doing a while loop, do while loop. And what this process does here, it's picking up, it's again reading from the folder location, from that same particular queue item, and it's reading one item at a time. So it's just like a for loop, right? Running one item from that queue one at a time. And it does a very simple thing. It just picks it up and throws a message box out. Very simple example in terms of showing how you insert a queue item in the queues and then how you see them and how you read it out. So there are a couple of things that will happen once we run this. We will have, you can go here, you can click on view transaction. So what it does, it will show you line items for each of the queue items that has been created. So we'll look at it. Let me put a breakpoint and then we'll run this. Not this one. All right, so let's come here. So I'll put a breakpoint here. I want to take a look at it before I start reading it because it's going to run in pretty quick. All right, so once you start automation, it already ran the first half of it where it created the queue item. So let's go back here, refresh my screen, and let's take a look at it. And there it is. So my queue items are very standard. So I have 5 items here. The status is new for each of them. There is no revision history. Their priority is very standard. Now, if I want to look at each of these individual items, I will go and click on view details. So that will show me the object information. So I have a simple spreadsheet where 3 properties, name, age, and city. So that lists over here. And in terms of a history of that particular item, it's right now in a new status. So that's what I see here. It provides, so these are the details. If you have some comments, and that will come to a different demo where we can add comments for each item programmatically you can add when your automation runs. If you want to track that, and obviously then you have a history. History says this was created by the user and when it was created. So you have the overall audit of it. So in a way, it also keeps track of the changes that is happening on it. So let's go back here and resume my automation. That's not that one. Where did it go? There it is. Okay. So we put a breakpoint, so it was holding here. Let's continue this. So once we continue, it shows a very simple message box. It was coming on my other screen, so it will show up here. So the purpose is that once we create it, we pull that information, show it what information was captured through the queue. Now this will just show all those 5 line items, and then we can take a look at it. So let's say so it's running in iteration. So I ran 1 and then I'm running second. So let's go back and take a look one more time. What's happening here? Refresh this and you can see these are 2 in progress and there are 3 in new. So as you update, so this is the beauty of it. If something gets failed, it will skip that, go on to the next one, and continue to process it. So if you have a larger file, you don't stop just because you have a data issue or some other exception that occurred for one line item. Until unless it's not an application exception, it's just a data exception and it's handled properly, you can continue and finish your automation and process the rest of it. So let's quickly go over this. So now all that is complete. So this you can see that this is all updated. So what we did, we only updated or showed that information. We pulled that information. So when the queue item is created, it stays in a new state. When we access or when we use it, that is the next state where it is in progress. So we picked one information. If you go look at the history, I have two. It's a creation and then it is in progress. Now you can ask, okay, why it is not complete yet? Because the status has to be updated. We did not update the status of it as complete. So when you have done processing, you have to also go back and update the status of that queue item to a completion or to a failure, depending on what is the outcome of that process. But the idea is that you can see and you can monitor each update to a particular queue item. So any number of stages that you want to build, you can define them. So if, for example, to a complex use case, let's say you have it's a claims processing system, and you get you're receiving a claim, a medical claim, then it has to go through multiple stages. There will be first a very standard data validation stage where you'll validate that if you have all the required data available to it, because you don't want to involve the next stages if you don't have all the required data. Similarly, after that stage is complete, you go on to the next stages to find out if you have all the medical information. Then you hand it over to an automation that can run through that particular claim and provide you in terms of cross-checking with benefits. It can provide you details like how much will be covered and how much will go to deductible and all that, right? So you can define these stages, not just have one stage as in progress and then complete. In one of my use cases that I've worked before, we defined almost 7 or 8 different stages where it can move on, continue. So I know if it fails at a certain stage, I also have a way to find out where it failed, what happened. And this history also helps me in terms of finding that. Um, and not just that, each and every automation also keeps a very detailed log. Um, due to today's scope, I won't go in too much into the logs, but yes, you can define a lot of information in log, what information you want to capture. And you also have other features that can help you debug through any of the issues. Whether you want to take a screenshot or record your screen. There are some pretty nice features for running your automation in unattended mode. All right, so so this one is complete. So I think that makes sense. Now you have a high level idea of how queues work and what is the purpose of having a queues. Any questions on this, Mason, Logesh, that still you want me to capture here?
No, I think we're good. We answered most of the questions in the chat, so I think we should be good.
All right, that's good. All right, so next one we'll talk about briefly, and I'll come back to one more example for queues, but let's just go through, look at the storage buckets. So storage buckets, as I was, well, before storage buckets, let's briefly touch upon assets. So we talked about assets also today. So assets can be a text file. So you can see some of the examples I have, like an application path that I created rather than moving it somewhere else. I have a text. Let me open this. So text can be a user, a URL, an application, or whatever, right? It's just a text-based information. that you can store here as an asset. The entry is very straightforward. The asset name and text are the two mandatory fields. Everything is optional here. And you can set up, if you want to set up assets based on robot, at a robot level, you can define the robot also, which robot can use a particular asset. So that's one way of doing it for text-based assets. Let me open this, let's open a new one. So for a new one, as we talked about those four options, right? You have a Boolean, integer, credential, and secret and text. So now we have five of them. So now we have a secret as well. In my slide, if you go, remember, right, I only had four of these. So the secret option is also there. Secret is essentially your key vaults or your AWS secret for IAM based on resources. If you have VMs configured, either Azure or AWS, you can use that also here too. All right, so that looks good. Let me go back and touch upon this one. So the one that's heavily used in terms of assets is a credential type. Let's look at that. So credential type asset is, so for this case, like I have created a Acme credential, which is my username and password. Like I said, if you have your systems where passwords expire at a certain interval, I think this is one of the best way to do it. Other than obviously, if you're going to use a secret with your API token and all that, that's another way to set up your asset. So that's about the assets. So let's come back to the storage buckets. So storage bucket is, let's first create one. I don't have a bucket here created. So storage bucket is like a storage space that UiPath has, the orchestrator provides, and not necessarily based on UiPath orchestrator, you can create your storage bucket. Like I said, right, it's not a document management system, so don't think that you can put uh, a lot of multiple files and all that, but you should use judiciously in terms of how you want to use it and what files you want to put it here. Uh, because again, not all the relevant information needs to be shared this way, right? So there is an alternate to that, what the way you can connect if you already have a storage, Azure storage or Amazon S3, where you have your organizational files, let's say, right? So you can leverage that directly. You don't have to recreate it and have duplicate information. So you can use either Azure storage or S3. You have to provide all that information that is needed here. But standard purpose is, let's say if I create this, and again, this is the only mandatory information. I can define whether it's a read only or audit read access. But if I have not toggled any of this, this could be editable by the automation also. So when I create this, what it does, it actually just creates an entry here. It also shows you who is the provider. For S3 and Azure storage, you will see those listed here. But now you may ask, okay, what I'm going to do now with this, right? Now I created this, what is this? Now upload file. So this is where I can upload a file. So just like you saw that, right? In the previous automation, it was a very simple example. I had 5 people. I have a list of folks, their name, age, and their location. That input file that I used there, if there is a scenario where I can keep that information or store that information, I can upload here and I can reference that in my automation through storage bucket. So that's very simple example. But one of the most probable example that I have seen is primarily in one of the examples for healthcare for claims processing, where we had uh, a dictionary, where we created a dictionary file. Rather than creating a dictionary object in the automation, we created a file with medical terms and have their synonyms listed out all here. So kind of it's an internal dictionary, right? That we put that in the storage bucket, and we are able to reference that in our automation to make sense of things. So you can use that. I'm not a big fan of using storage buckets because in terms of security of data is kind of on the automation platform rather than managing that data internally within an organization. So you can decide what information you want to share on storage bucket or not. All right, so that's storage bucket complete. So now coming back to queues, one of the things that we talked about today, right? That we can create an item and then we can access that information also from queues and run them iteratively from each of these items. And as if something fails, we can again come back to it. So, and a little bit advanced concept, I know that's not necessarily part of the associate developer course curriculum itself, but when you are reading through it, you may encounter it, which is back in the days, it was called RE framework. There are multiple versions of it over the years. There is an enhanced RE framework. There is a and most of the organizations, like even in my organizations, we have customized that RE framework internally for our purposes. So that's another thing that you want to look at it because that provides you a structure in terms of managing that life cycle of your data processing. So I'll touch upon briefly on that because I think that's a valuable information, and even though it's not necessarily covered in detail in associate, but you should know that. Where is it? So in a way, the standard method is to break it down into two pieces, where we break the automation into two robots or two separate automations. One is called dispatcher, and another is called performer. And even it is there in working with Orchestrator uh, program, the training course on the UiPath Academy. If you look at it, you'll see there that it does cover both the scenarios for dispatcher and performer. Before I forget, I got one more thing for you guys for queue items. So this is another resource. I know UiPath training has really great walkthrough sessions, even some sample code also that you can take a look at it, run through it, and uh, understand that. But I would also encourage you to look at the documentations. Because documentation has a lot more in-depth information. So what I was talking about earlier, right? That the queue, when the queue starts, what different stages it goes through. So this is just one of the examples. It lays out really well how a queue process happens after the queue is added. And when we fetch that information, it gets into in progress state, and then it can be successful, failed, or abandoned. And obviously, if you remember that toggle, right, a retry is needed. That toggle feature is covered here. If you have defined as retried in the next iteration of that automation, you can retry that queue. So take a look at that. I'm not going to read through this, but this is a vast of information over here. Um, and overall, like this particular section will have a lot of information on how to manage queue, how to run queues, how do you handle business exception, automation exception. Those are some of the best practices that you work through when you are developing your automation. And similarly, some of the other things that we talked about, like storage buckets, you can look at how the storage buckets are divided. Which one is that? Yeah. So storage buckets in terms of how it is defined, um, and where else you can pull information from, like Azure and S3, AWS S3. All right, so now this is one of the use cases that is also covered in our associate developer training, where you're reading through account information for a bank application, where you're creating a new customer, right? So it's broken into two different automation programs. One is your dispatcher, another is performer. So dispatcher, as the name suggests, what it does, it reads through an Excel file and it creates the queue item, which is very standard, what we already looked at in the previous example. The next example is what is more important in terms of the performer, how the performance happens. So I'll touch upon this one, and then when you're going through your training program, right, that will help you in terms of uh, understanding it. So here, if you see, when I open this performer automation, the performer automation is where we are going to retrieve queue items one at a time, and then we'll run through the process. And this is what I was talking about, right? So we mostly look at automation when we are running through. We are always looking at this. We are looking at the sequence where each step by step the automation goes through and performs. But this is your state machine where we are defining how the process will actually run. And for us to be able to build an enterprise automation, we have to understand this, how we build it, how we define, because this provides you layer, right? Uh, it provides you a structure to your automation where each stage goes through, and how you handle exception handling, how you handle logging, how you manage your resources. All those things can be defined here. So it looks like a flow chart, right? So you start, you uh, log into your automation orchestrator, you get retrieve information, then you invoke process transaction. Process transaction is the main stage where actual all the processing will happen. And if I think anything fails, that goes to the next stage where if anything has stopped, then what are the next steps, right? If a particular queue item fails, then what is the next step for you? Are you just going to log it and call it failed, or you're going to trigger an email notification to your team or the respective team, right? Depending on if it is a business application, if it's a application error, or just you have a standard escalation process, right? It depends on that. And then obviously once you decide where it needs to go, then you can define that flow and complete that cycle. Obviously, at the end of it, you have to update each queue item, whether it's successful, failed, or in transit, or whatever other state that you would like to add to it. So that's uh, an interesting way. If you're not familiar from building automation flows, then this is one of the ways that defined um, a structured automation development framework. Earlier, it used to be called as RE framework. Now it has different names and different versions of it. So I won't emphasize too much on it. But you can create it when you're creating a new project. You can find out advanced automation framework, RE framework. If you search the type, then you'll find that, and you can use that as a baseline for your automation. Inside this, it's pretty straightforward when we are reading through each. So we are getting transaction item for Acme Bank queue. We're pulling information from there. Once we have, then we perform pre-processing. Once we have pre-processing done, then obviously then we are going through the website and entering all the data and creating the customer. So it goes through each step, entering name, address, phone, email, so on and so forth, right? And then once it is complete, then it will create the transaction. And at the end of it, don't forget to update the transaction status for each successful transaction item. And if there is an issue, then obviously the catch in the catch section, you can mark that transaction item as failed, and that will conclude your automation. So that's how we design a transactional based automation using queues. One of the other things that I wanted to touch upon, where is it, is about triggers. So when we create this automation, right? Let me go there. So here, when we have a published automation here, if I click on this, it can directly start as a job. But let's say I don't want to create or set up a job for today, right now. I can define a job and I can set up a trigger. So you can set up a trigger from here, and it can be either a time-based trigger, a queue-based trigger, an event-based trigger, or API trigger. So trigger is just another way of managing your automation in an unattended way. So you are not running these automations by yourself, either through attended or just like someone coming here and starting that automation. So that's where we use triggers to run through. There are a ton of other features here, as you can see, right? But for our scope of work for today, we'll just limit to these topics. Let me come back to I to the best practices. These are again some standard best practices in general that you can adopt. And obviously, at the end of the day, you have to also discuss with your IT team, and then come to agreed upon standard to be used between IT and your dev team. So essentially, the like having a standard meaningful name for all these updating versions, because this is another very interesting challenge. There are versions, you keep the versions, and if you don't update your automation from one version to another version, there are challenges. Sometimes you may have set up a particular automation running every 3 months, and if some breaking change has been released and you may have upgraded your orchestrator, then you may be or you are using the cloud platform itself rather than an on-prem orchestrator, then you may get into that challenge. Yeah, needless to say, each package that you publish should have the environment, should have its permissions defined in a agreed upon way. So you have all your team members have access to it, and obviously the ones that you don't want, they don't have access to it either. So you have to manage that role-based access. Uh, Trigger time zone is very important. Trigger time zone, you have to make sure sometimes, like I work with some of the customers, their tenant is sometimes set up in East Coast, and then those customers are in West Coast. So you have to be careful about how you set up your time zone or trigger time for your automation, so you're running it on a right time. And obviously logging is important. There is a ton of logging that UiPath provides out of the box. The most interesting features are replay features, whether you can take screenshots and also have a recorded version for your automation that you can use for debugging. So I think that's all that I have for today. And I'll open it up for folks here to have any questions or anything that you want me to cover or take a look at it. I'll be glad to do that.
Pradeep, there is one question in the chat which says, can you share the framework links just Pradeep mentioned? Is that the RE framework that you mentioned? Probably I might have missed that part.
Yes. So yeah, so I'll show you where you can find it. We don't have to give you a link. So if you go to UiPath Studio, right, and the start page, and you want to create your automation, you can see these templates here, and you'll see Robotic Enterprise Framework here.
Hey,
And there are
Pradeep, can you put the link for the studio in the, oh, it's on the computer, right? Yeah.
yes. So yeah, if you're using Studio Web, then you
Uh-huh.
won't have the RE framework. This is part of the desktop, right? So in everyone, whoever, if you have UiPath desktop, it's already available to you. You just have to look at the template section when you're creating a new automation, and you can pick robotic enterprise framework is what I was talking. And when you select this, you will find, let me see if I have the documentation. I can find
I
that.
can share that in the chat, Pradeep. I found that. I'll share that in the chat.
Okay, okay, great. So yeah, so there is a RE framework detailed documentation that comes packaged as part of the template itself. So you can read through that. It's a good read. To be honest, the first time when you're doing it, it may feel a little intimidating, but believe me, it's worth that effort of going through that. So, but it's a one time effort, a one-time time investment, honestly, but it will help you learn how to build a real robust enterprise system. And there are a lot of other automation framework like test automation framework, even this attended automation framework. If you're just building attended automation, you can look at that too. And these are built by UiPath team. Some of them are also from marketplace, like senior developers, MVPs. They also publish their templates. They may also be available to you to learn from it. So that's always a good exercise looking at this. But yeah, start with RE framework.
And Pradeep, I have one more question regarding folders, right? Let's say in one tenant, I created one process, and under that again dev QA and
Hmm.
UAT subfolders, right?
Hmm.
First I have tenant, and then I have IT
Yeah.
as a folder. Under that again environments, right? Next level, again third level.
Okay.
So environments. So is there any way we can automate the build, right, or the packages, or the assets? Let's say I have one project, one process which
Hmm.
has assets, and which has assets with the credentials, which will be dev to dev and QA to QA connections, right? So how can we automate that? Moving from one environment to another environment.
Yeah. So but there are many ways to do it. If you want to just move those assets, there is
Not
a
only
tool.
assets, complete package, right? I
Right,
don't
right,
know.
right. I get it.
Yeah.
I get it. So there is a marketplace. Let me see. There is an orchestrator manager. Hold on. Look at that one. UiPath Marketplace Orchestrator Manager. Yeah, this one. So you can use this one. And I think I covered that, but not here. It has, so this orchestrator manager would help you migrate your assets, your queue definitions, um, from one tenant to another tenant. You can actually provide where you want to go. It actually gives you from and to options. So this is one of the interesting tools that you can use for that migration.
Okay.
Yeah, just to
Yeah.
add to what Pradeep mentioned, I also shared another link in the chat, Santi, which is solutions management. UiPath has something called solutions management. So that is a like modern way of packaging all your resources together along with assets, connections, everything, and port that across different tenants or different organizations.
Yeah, where is that solution component? You're right. So if you have like if you're running on an on-prem environment, or Orchestrator Manager would be the tool to go with. Where is it? Do I have access to it?
No, if you go to, can you click on automation ops? We have a
Yeah,
automation. Click on the
I,
grid and
I
then
don't think so. I have
click on
assigned
more
it. Yeah, it may be
and
here. Hold on. Let me
automations.
change my mind. Yes, there it is. Yeah, that's another way of doing it.
Okay, I think it is moved to Orchestrator now. So it was originally here. Now it is moved to Orchestrator. So if you go to Orchestrator,
Yeah.
there is a solutions tab. I
Okay.
think, yeah,
Yeah, they keep changing
yeah.
from one version to another
Tenant,
version.
yeah, click on tenant and then there is a solutions tab. Yeah, this one.
Solutions.
Yeah,
Yeah.
there it is. Yeah, there it is. So that's also you can create a deployment and package and project transition.
Gotcha.
Yeah, it's an entire life cycle. The solutions
Yeah.
is an entire life cycle. The documentation has the complete details about the life cycle. Probably if there is more interest, we can do like a separate session for solutions
Yeah.
management in the future.
I think there is one, but I think we did last year. It may be a little bit older version. I think solution management, I remember we did that, but it might be a little older, I think 2024. So maybe Diana, that's a good topic. We can cover that as well.
Okay.
Good question. Thank you, Shanti. Do you have any other follow-up on that?
No, I think I'm good. Yeah, I have
Yeah.
to look into it. Yeah.
Okay.
I had one question. I posted on the chat as well. Apologies if there was a response to it. I had to leave and come back to this call. Anyways, I was trying to ask. We have one bot license, and but we have multiple users. So is there like a queue for jobs in the orchestrator? When we upload the workflow into the orchestrator so that they don't run into each other, like they don't cause issues. So basically we have one bot and
One
one
unattended,
process,
yeah,
but
one unattended automation you're saying, right?
correct, yes, yeah.
Okay. So what you can do, you can stagger them. Is it running on a time-based trigger?
um yeah, it will be time-based trigger, yes, yeah. And also we would like to at times do like ad hoc runs, like
Hmm.
each employee, 5 or 6 employees would be doing ad hoc runs.
Yeah,
uh,
so you can, so obviously if you have an unattended automation, I would, I mean, until unless it is required by for business, I would always recommend to run that unattended process out of office hours, either early in the morning or after office in the evening, right? So that your
okay,
daytime is open for you to
I see.
experiment with things and whichever way you want to run this. The other thing is you can define the priority. And even if let's say for example, let's say, right, your automation is about to run in next 2 minutes and another developer goes and he triggers an automation, right?
Okay,
So after that automation is complete, the unattended automation will pick it up. It's not going to lose because it's already in the queue. And once that first automation is complete, you can define the priority for this, for the unattended one, and it will run. It will run after that, as soon as the robot is available. But
okay.
ideally, if it is an unattended bot, the recommendation is to run it out of business hours.
Out of business hours. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay.
And I have a question on follow-up onto that. Like, let's say I have unattended license, right? And is there any way limit we can process, like, we can run these processes for one attended license? Any limit on that, or any a number of
No,
process we
no,
can?
there is no limit on it. You can run as many automations you want to run. But
Oh,
that is how usually you calculate the return on investment, right? That
yeah.
you want to run your unattended automation or unattended bot. You want to put as much work that can be run as an unattended. So that way, means obviously you have to also look at, right, how much, what is the utilization of your robot? Think from that perspective, right? If your automation, because these robots, they can run 24/7, right? No issues. So you have to look at out of 24 hours, how many hours or how many minutes you're actually using it.
Got
So
you. Mm.
think from that perspective. There is no limit to it. You can run any number of automation. You do have to validate. So let's say like some of the examples I was touching upon, right? If you're running a very long running and data intensive process, so you have to have at least some idea of it, like how long it is going to take. Based on that, you can either stagger your automation on top of each other, or you can give them time. Like let's say this automation is going to take 20 minutes, right? So
Mm-hmm.
you have to do few things, right? When you're defining your automation, you have to look at, let's say the automation takes 20 minutes. Then you have to define another layer on it, another layer of business rules. It should be here. So if I do, let's say time-based trigger on this one, so it provides me some options here, right? So you define it here, you define the frequency, like I want to run daily, what time I want to run, right? And then I also want to define, if I want to define any restrictions, like when I want to define, and then I also want to define that if I want to, if that automation, let's say, does not finish in time, in 20 minutes, right? What happens because of any error, right? If it gets stuck. So you also have to define what is the maximum time that automation can be active. So Orchestrator will take care of it. If you define like, okay, my actual execution time is 20 minutes, but let's say this automation keeps running for 40 minutes, then I want this automation, this process to be shut down or killed. So you can define all those values, and Orchestrator will monitor it for you. Because I have
One more
seen the,
question. Uh,
go ahead.
yeah, one more question is about the test cases, right? Let's say, the process, how can we define the test cases or regression? Let's say after some time, if I make changes to the existing process, right? Like, I want to run certain test cases or regression, whatever. So how you will be handling that QA part?
So test case and test case management is another UiPath product, like test management. So you manage as part of that, not as part of this. This is right now what we are talking about today is standard automation and obviously back office operations automation. But when we talk about test data management, that is a separate topic. Hold on. Test manager. Are
Okay,
you
got you.
familiar with this?
No.
Okay. So Test Manager is the overarching testing platform for UiPath, which actually provides you option where you can create test cases, you can create test data sets, you can create test sets, and what you're talking about regression or smoke testing and whatnot, right? So those things you can define here and you can work through that. But for that, this is the right product for this Test
Got you.
Manager.
Okay.
All right. I think
Uh,
we are on
um,
time, or we
a
have
couple
some more
more
time.
questions, if that's
Sure.
okay. I just wanted to ask you, like, right now, like, our developer has his credentials, like password and user ID in the studio. So it's working in the studio, but when we migrated to Orchestrator, will Orchestrator be able to take that password and user ID and access third-party software? Or are there restrictions on those?
So if
Uh,
you are, yeah, if you are moving it to Orchestrator, I would suggest take out that username password uh, configuration from your automation code itself and create an asset.
asset? Mhm.
Yes, and then you reference that asset in your code, because
Okay.
putting it means, first of all, you're exposing your username credential, right? And that in the code
Yes.
itself, so that's not a good practice. The other
Mhm.
thing is like in my organization and many more that I have worked with, they usually change their password every 90 days or 45 days, something like that.
Yes.
So
Yes.
at every interval, then you have to go back and update your automation, publish it again, right? So that's an unnecessary work that you would be engaged in. Rather than if you pull that out into as a credential asset, then what you have to do whenever the time for change, right? You just go and update the asset, your automation runs without any problem. No issues with that, right? So you just come here. I think one of the assets I had was the credential asset. So let's say if this is your credential asset created here, when you have to update, you just come here, change your password or change your login, whichever might be the case, right? And then you just update your asset and you're good to go.
Okay, so that that asset is in the orchestrator itself. It's set up in the orchestrator, but referenced in the code. Okay.
That's right. That's right.
Okay. Okay. Got it. Yeah.
All right. If there are no further questions, I'm okay to wait for a few more minutes if you have questions here. If not, I think I'll hand it over to Diana.
Yeah, thank you so much, Pradeep. Anybody have any additional questions they want to ask? Okay.
I see okay, that's good. Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah, great job today, everybody. Thank you for all your questions in the chat and your activity. It's really helpful when you guys do this, so we know what your questions are. And thank you, Lagesh and Mason, for helping with that chat and responding as well. So
Yeah,
Right.
thank you.
thanks, everybody.
Bye.
All
Bye.
right. Bye.